Good afternoon, everyone. Trinity youth, parents, siblings, randos. Super excited to share with you today. I want to talk to you guys today about positioning. Now, you know me, I talk a lot, so I'm going to try and make this as short, brief, succinct as possible. When I think about positioning, I think about the game of Battleship. If you don't know what Battleship is, you're really missing out on the game of a lifetime, honestly. They have a physical board and they also have a mobile app that you could play. Actually, we might actually be able to play with each other from home through Wi-Fi. That would be cool. Let's look into that later. So the way the Battleship works is pretty simple. You put your ships in a secret spot on this grid. So you move them around and you put them in these secret locations where the person you're playing with they can't see, and so the goal is to put them in a super secret spot, and then you take turns firing missiles. I like to picture Goliath missiles from Iron Man 1. I don't know, that's me. Heat-seeking Goliath missiles. But anyways, you take turns firing missiles back at each other, Goliath missiles, and you try to hit the other person's ship. Now, the way most people play Battleship is since you don't know where the other person put their ship, you basically just keep firing, and eventually you hit something. Now, it's a bit of a chance, a little bit of strategy. I don't know. Sometimes you just get lucky. I love this game. I used to play it all the time when I was working at the Jewish school, and I would have kids, and we would play on our mobile phone, and we would just pass the phone back and forth. Something you can do right now at home. But anyways, we would take turns firing at each other and trying to hit. Now, as a result of playing so much, I'm embarrassed to say how much I played, but as a result, I discovered this foolproof way of how to win Battleship. Oh no, I'm not gonna tell you what it is. Then you'll be able to beat me at Battleship. That's not what this is about. Anyways, the point is positioning your ships in the right spot can be a certain victory. It can be imminent death, and sometimes it can be a little bit in between. You basically firing at each other, and you're just hearing miss, hit, whatever it is. Sometimes you just gotta fire your shots and see what happens. But if you want to have any kind of strategy at all, it means that you want to put your ships in a good spot. Most people recommend not putting them in a line next to each other. Whatever. That's a freebie. Take it with you. We're going to go to the Bible and we're going to talk about what the Bible says about positioning. I'm going to talk to you about these two individuals in the Bible. Let me see if you can figure out who I'm talking about. I'm talking about one person in the Bible who was sold into slavery by his family. All right. And I'm going to talk about a woman in the Bible who was taken as a captive, who was an orphan, and ended up being raised by her cousin, who kind of adopted her. You know what I'm talking about, right? I guess it's a one-way video. You're not going to be able to respond. But obviously, you just yelled at the screen, duh, Joseph and Esther, and you would be right. So these guys have such interesting lives, such interesting stories, but they are great examples positioning, God's positioning, being placed in the right time, in the right place at the right time for a greater purpose than they could even see way at the beginning. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. You can read about it in Genesis 37, verses 12 to 36. But as a slave, he moved around a bit. He experienced success, and then all of a sudden, he was thrown into jail for, get this, for not committing adultery. So he was actually thrown into jail for that. Some of you are nodding at your screen. You got in trouble for something at school or at home with your parents for something that you didn't even do, and you're like, yeah, I could relate to Joseph. Wrong, you can't. Joseph was in jail for like super long time. Okay, so until you're in jail for a super long time, don't tell me, oh yeah, I get it, Joseph. You don't. None of us do. I don't. I je comprends pas. So anywho, what's really cool is that Joseph gets taken out of prison. He ends up interpreting a dream, and he ends up saving the lives of basically all of Egypt, a ton of Israelites, all because he was in the right position at the right time. He becomes second to Pharaoh. But what's really cool about Joseph is what he says in Genesis chapter 45, verses 4 to 8. It says, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come close to me.' When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing, there will be no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. Esther found herself in a weird situation where she's an orphan taken as a captive by the king Ahasuerus of Persia. And so she's taken and she's basically adopted by Mordecai, who was her cousin. And because of how beautiful Esther is, how beautiful she looks, she ends up being in this random beauty pageant to be the next queen. It's like kind of a situation of Persia's next top queen model. I don't know. But as a result, she ends up being taken on as queen. And then she hears about this other employee who's there who casually hates the Jewish people and decides that he wants to kill them all. This is a little awkward for Esther because she's Jewish. It's just that nobody knows. It's like me sitting in on a room where people are just bad mouthing people from Barbados, and I'm just like, anywho, let's see what happens, because Esther's in this situation where she's this Jewish orphan queen who is hearing about a plot to kill the Jewish people. So this is a conversation that Esther has in chapter 4, verses 10 to 14 between her and Mordecai. They're kind of communicating. It's like an old school text. It goes, then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends his gold scepter and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I've been called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone out of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Morty says to Esther, who knows that you have come to this position for such a time as this. I think about God a lot, and I think about how great he is, and I think about how even though we're in the middle of a terrible situation right now, and that we get so focused on the bad stuff that's happening, we're so focused on the quarantine and toilet paper right now, but we're not recognizing the fact that sometimes we go through bad periods of our life for God to position us and to place us in the right place so that at the right time we're able to be obedient and do what he needs us to do. I don't think when Joseph was being sold into slavery, he was like, I'm being positioned. I don't think when Esther was an orphan and taken into captivity, she was saying, perfect, this is just like we planned, God. But sometimes God uses these bad situations to put us in the right spot at the right time. Could it be that God has put us in this moment right now in the middle of this quarantine for a greater purpose? Could it be that maybe this is chapter 1 of the book of Sarah and Leah? Could it be chapter 1 of the book of Jade and Jimmy? Could it be chapter 1 in the book of Adrian or Isaac or Debbie or Jade? Who knows? But I know one thing is that sometimes we need to let go of what the world is focusing on, the craziness. We need to see past the bad situation and understand the fact that God is ultimately in control, that God is the one that decides what happens, that God was not taken for a loop by COVID-19, but rather that sometimes we go through these moments for God to put us in the right position for the right time. All we can do is be obedient, trust in him, rejoice, and be comforted at the fact that we are not outside of his plan or his will. That when we are obedient, that we will see great things happen and transpire in our lives. Do me a favor, go and read the full story of Joseph and Esther. You have plenty of time. Share in the comments down below about what you're taking from the story. Share the video with other youth members, people that you know, and have them share as well, so that we can use this period as a time for us to learn from each other different perspectives that we take from this story. You have tons of time. Don't give me excuses. I'll see you tomorrow.